From the trenches of motorsports and Gearhead Central, this is RealTuners Radio, your all-motor, boosted, and nitrous-fed hour of power. Now, here's your hosts, the Reverends of RPM, the Faction of Traction, John Bewley, Scott Clark, Bill Fowler, Scott Evans, Mark Dahlquist, Mike Perduto, James Short, Tom Sewell, Brian Barnhill. This is RealTuners Radio.
Good evening, folks. Welcome back to another episode of RealTuners Radio. You've told us that you like episodes where we take tech questions, so here we are again with another Q&A. If you're like us, you'd like to talk about anything other than COVID-19 or protests. So grab a drink or a wrench, maybe not both, and let's get going. This is RealTuners Radio. Greetings, folks. What's going on? Scott here, just checking in, and I don't know if I've got the guys coming in here yet or not. What's going on? Hey, guys, can anybody hear me? Can you hear me?
What's up? Yeah, what's up?
Anyone?
Hello?
Yeah, guys
Can you hear us? I don't know.
Or they're not talking to me. I can't hear them. What did we do?
What?
Hold on.
You
Working on
take
it.
us.
There we go. Now we can do something. Okay. What's going on?
It's helpful if you take us off mute if you want to hear us.
No, so the problem is I did, but I got this thing that's been working so good this last month. All of a sudden, I don't know what happened. I didn't even try. I wasn't even messing with something. The stupid thing like the mute buttons aren't working right. I have to click on the screen. Whatever. No big deal, man. If it's 5 seconds of not hearing Bewley talk, that ain't the end of the world. Cold. I know. Harsh. Sorry. I'm terrible. Oh, mercy.
You just didn't get to hear me say, well, it helps if you take us off mute, dumbass.
Dumbass. Man, it just ain't a day if Bewley doesn't call you dumbass at some point.
That's 9 a.m.
Because the way he says it just carries so much mass. You dumbass.
No, you need special kinds.
Gotta get my that 70 show, bark in there.
You have that nailed.
Dumbass.
Yes. Hilarious. No, oh my God, what a week. Ugh, okay. Checking in, Jeff Bonfeld, Millstad, Illinois. Good to see you guys, man. Jerry, all these guys are here. The Jerry 3567, the good Jerry, not the weird Jerry. But anyway, so what's shaking? We gotta just kick it off. Dudes on the show, anything new? Oh, wait a minute, Barnhill's here. Dude, tell us about the guy from Italy. Barnhill's getting cursed in Italian because UPS.
We were already talking about that. You missed my rant against all things Italian because
I saw it on the group chat this afternoon. I'm like, anybody want to go troll this guy?
I was dealing with a bunch of Italian. I like AIM devices. I like their dashes. I like their data logging. Sometimes their software isn't the greatest.
Right.
I guess not their software. Their software is great. Their documentation is terrible. Their tech support is amazing, and it's great that it is.
Yeah. Because
a lot of times it's just not in the documentation. But yeah, right. No. Apparently, the fact that half this country is burning or whatever, and that shipments have been delayed for what we're going on. Are we in 2 months right now? Whatever.
Yeah. Imagine that.
Every single shipper has announced that, hey, there's shipping delays. And this is posted on our website, on every website. And, we try to get things out as quickly as possible. And in this case, we shipped something the same day the order showed up. And I guess it didn't show up in Italy by Tuesday when it left Massachusetts on Friday. And I've had threats. I've had attempts at extortion, threatening PayPal chargebacks. The typical, I'm going to go online, I'm going to leave bad reviews for you because I won't refund his full order for an item he doesn't want to return. And just because didn't show up in 2 days because UPS.
Brian's the nicest guy.
Truck,
if this had happened to Bewley, there'd have been 31 F-bombs dropped. But all Brian's, I saw a post on our private group chat and Facebook today that said, anybody know how to troll an Italian?
So wait. Where's Fowler? I hear there's a story we have to hear about.
Yeah, Bill's not on here right now.
I just want to know, out of all this, for Bill Fowler to come in and then say 2 or 3 blurbs.
Yeah.
And then
tell him what he said.
Oh, and by the way, in case this escalates, I can represent you in an Italian court of law.
Right? Hilarious.
And then explain it.
No, he didn't tell the story. He's like,
long story.
Long story.
Long story, but if this escalates, I'm
licensed to practice in Italy.
To represent you in an Italian court of law.
I don't even want to know. That guy's got more stories. Yeah, you don't want to know.
What?
For the listeners that don't understand, Bill Fowler can not only recommend you the best brake package, put a Coyote into an old Mustang. He can also represent you in a court of law. That man is a man of everything.
Apparently
in Italy.
Country.
In Italy.
Oh, he can send demand letters in Italian. Now he can make it happen for sure.
Well,
and he can give you, he can give you a good bourbon recommendation, a good Scotch recommendation. He's pretty good with rum and tequila too.
He's a well-rounded dude, man. And I don't know. So I don't know if any of you guys are into wine. Anybody's got any wino wives out there? But he's also the executive producer of the Somm Into the Bottle series. They have their own TV show now. But like, I went to my local wino store picking up some bottle of wine and just happened to get on the topic. Oh yeah, I have a friend that produced that. You ever seen that Into the Bottle video? And apparently it's like the national anthem theme for wine drinking people or whatever. It's a really good movie.
I'll have to bring that up to my wife. So
yeah.
Actually, my brother's moving out to California, so I think we might have to make a few trips out there anyway.
You should go visit Bill if you can, dude. He always shows a good time.
Oh yeah. Well, hopefully we wind up out there at least once this year for the drift season. Still, man, that's still super up in the air. There's a bunch of conversations about that right now. So
you see all the events and it's what was it? Summit Motorsports Park just said fuck it for the rest of the year.
So did Route 66.
Oh God, that sucks for the Michigan guys.
Did yesterday.
Man. I mean, I think you're just going to start seeing the effects of that clampdown due to the virus here soon or later, but not right off the bat. You know what I mean? I think it's a delayed response thing, and I think it sucks. I'm currently hanging out in a vacation town, and the whole place is dead. Totally dead.
I think a lot of what we're gonna see is as the economic impact becomes more clear, we start seeing sponsors pull the plug or have to back out, and that's a problem we've seen. We've seen a major tire sponsor pull out of Formula Drift. Unfortunately, was the tire sponsor for our team. There's going to be more of that, I think, as more economic impact becomes clear and what the long-term plan is going to be. And sponsors have to reevaluate with how much money they have to spend and where they're going to spend it, and that's going to have this trickle-down effect. And especially as we find out, can we or can we not have spectators? Most motorsports don't make money off the sponsorship or the syndication or off the syndication, the television, especially Formula Drift. We don't make money off the industry. It's whatever we make off sponsors, and then everything else is merchandise and spectators. And that's why the discussion of when the season's going to happen and how the events are going to happen is because we're trying to do it where we can at least, even if we have to have a limited spectator, where we can at least have some spectators, and we get the benefit of when we go to like a NASCAR venue, we only use a quarter of the venue. But it's definitely gonna have a long-term effect. And, sports like, that's my biggest memory of, NHRA stuff when I was, 4 or 5 years old was, walking through the pits, basically John Force pulling me up on his trailer with him, to talk to me. And that's the same thing, FD, Supercross, all of that. It's always been very open pits, and that's been a big thing. And I don't think we're going to see that this year, which is kind of sad because I enjoy that part of working at events.
I feel you. And you need those sponsors, man. Or you need those attendees. I mean, I haven't talked to or heard from Keith Berry since Woodstock, but like 2 days before the event, they told him no spectators, right? And I'm not privy to what goes on there at the track, but I kind of had to wonder, what did that cost out of pocket to still have that event? Because, dude, what keeps the tracks open are spectator gate fees and concessions, right? That's usually, that's like what Danny Davis and Justin Keith, we've had them on here before. We've had a number of promoters on here. Oh, and Donald Long, Bewley's favorite. We had him on here, and he was explaining, hey, dude, the entry fees are what keeps these tracks alive, so keep people coming. Well, shit. You can't do that.
As a driver too, in drifting, this is huge, but it's true in probably most motorsports, especially at this level. Purse money is garbage.
Yeah,
you don't make money
to what you put
winning.
in the car. Yeah.
Even at the NASCAR level, I don't know what the purse is, but it's big, but what does it cost to bring a team out for that weekend or to that car? So all of your money is made either from sponsorship and endorsement deals and from merchandise. And drifting, especially merchandise, is huge. We always used to joke, we'd see a driver do something and lose an event. There's one particular in St. Louis where I watched
I lost Barnhill.
He doesn't give a shit.
There he goes.
Oh, you guys good?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
You froze just for a couple seconds. No big deal.
I got a message. But I watched drivers lose an event and say he doesn't care because he just sold way more T-shirts because he got so many fans because that looks so badass.
Yeah,
so,
right. Good for him.
Yeah.
I'm all for making money in any way in this sport here, but
yeah, whatever it's saying.
I want to take a minute to do a little shout out to all the guys that come in here and listen to us. Everybody, Jerry 3567 on YouTube, Jeff Bonifield, Millstadt, Illinois. Always good to hear from you guys. Joe West, Davenport, Iowa, from West Racing Fab is on here. I know who you are, dude. Andrew Netherland, our buddy Global Media too. He's got a name I have a hard time pronouncing, so I like Global Media. McMurtry, good to see you. Chris Spielvogel, Bill Armstrong, all guys from classes. John Ryan. I had a good chat with him. Pro Stock John, man. He actually talked to me. I talked to him on the phone for the first time last week. Had an awesome chat with that guy. And then he's like, wait, did you used to be Diesel Geek? and I'm like, no, maybe. But Kevin Schweitzer, Tim Scheiman, who's a relative of mine. What's up? Believe it or not. Mike Perduto, good to see you logged in and talking to people, even though you're on here with us. Joe Sorbello. Who else? James Ferguson. Larry Norman, my man. I owe him a response to a text message. Lee Connor from the UK. What time is it over there, dude? Steve Licht, always good to hear from him from Full Throttle Speed up in Michigan, who are currently suffering. Actually, those guys are the ones that are getting hosed. Their governor is friggin' Nazi. But anyway, Jake Hildebrandt, always good to have you. Brian Murphy, what's up? Jeremy Vandermeer, good to see you again. Justin Torres, I don't know who you are, but hola, man. John Ryan. Okay, I love these replies. Kenny Howard is back in here. Kenny, dude, we ran out of honey, man. When are you going to be selling some more of that stuff? We gobbled that shit up. He sent me some honey that is out of this world. Anyway, I just wanted to shout out to everybody who listens here because we appreciate having you guys show up, man. We're not monetized. We don't make money off any of this or anything. We just have fun doing this. So, Evans is here. Sound guys matter. Why don't you log in then?
Jeremy Vandermeer, yes, you can run an air to water on that car on the street and it will work perfectly fine. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't, and don't let anybody try and tell you that it has to have an air to air on it to be a street car. It'll work perfectly fine with an air to water on the street.
Damn straight it will.
Air to water. I love air to waters on street cars. I try and talk people into running air to waters on street cars. You can run a much smaller core. You can package it a lot better. Pure physics.
And that's what so many OEMs do.
Yeah, I mean,
you're right. Exactly.
If air to waters didn't work so well, they wouldn't be on CTSVs and all the blower cars.
Yep.
And
every power is a diesel on the road.
Yeah, they wouldn't run. They run them as heat exchanger systems. You wouldn't have to run a heat exchanger on your system if you didn't want to. You could run it with a big water tank in the trunk. Being in a turbo car, you could just run it off of the big tank and monitor your water temps and do it that. Or you could put a heat exchanger in the system if you wanted to, but don't put it in line with the intercooler core. Put it on its own separate circuit off of the tank in the back, so you can run it independent of the intercooler core itself. But yeah, I mean, dude, I try to get everybody to run air water intercoolers, even on the street cars. They work so much better. I mean, water's 14 times better at removing heat from aluminum than air is. I don't care what anybody says. You can do a better job with an air to water, even with ambient temp water, than you can an air to air intercooler on a car.
I'm gonna bust on someone's balls real fast. How come Angel Short can log in and listen to us, but James can't be on with us? I'm just wondering. Hi, James. I know you're listening.
James got to be out in the garage to keep Angel in this lifestyle she's used to living, sitting on her butt and put out chairs in the garage.
I'm just waiting for her to log on just to yell at Muley.
My day wouldn't be complete if Angel wasn't talking some bullshit.
Jack, air to water up front or air to water intake, both work just fine. I mean, you can get away with either if you have the packaging room for the air to water intake. Height-wise, it definitely makes for a much cleaner install. But as far as which one, you can run either. You're not going to have an issue with either one of them, man. They'll both do what you want to do as long as they're sized appropriately. I'm looking. See what else we got for tech questions.
The frozen boost intercoolers are good, but they're heavy. And the cores are kind of archaic. It's a good budget core, but, some of those big ones can get up 65, 70 pounds. So got to be mindful of that. They could survive a nuclear apocalypse, but the cores aren't all that great, and you gotta work on them a little bit. They won't support the power that they're advertised at without a little work. The water bungs need to be upsized. They're a little shy on the water bung sizes to get enough water through them to support the power, but they're really good cores for the money.
Mark Rios is making fun of your accent.
Do what?
Mark Rios is making fun of your accent right now.
Some a fucking army dude that lives in North Carolina. Tell him he needs to go play with the Marines or something.
Intercooler.
He needs to go jump out of a fucking helicopter or something.
He apparently used to be local to me down here. He knows Eddie and a bunch of the other local guys. I don't remember meeting him. I might have. He has very good recommendations, very good reviews, though.
He's a good dude. He's a smart dude. He's a pretty good tuner.
Joe Sorbello, whoever you are, you're my hero. Got a beer in one hand tonight and a whiskey in the other. I already like this guy. Didn't say what kind of whiskey, though, so kind of that's a question.
I was looking on, I was cruising Facebook, and Michael Veldman, one of my Facebook friends, got a tattoo between his thumb and his forefinger. And literally in that crook between his thumb and his forefinger, he got the tattoo that says "Beer goes here."
I like it.
I laughed my ass off.
Jerry, for those of you running methanol on VP's site, that M2 top end oil is not O2 sensor safe. Have you run into any issues here, or do you reduce the oil per gallon mix at the expense of lubrication to help? Real quick, I don't typically run the VP lube. I use a product from Outlaw Racing Fuels just because he's local and I can go grab it whenever I want to. So I don't have personal experience with that, but to my knowledge, for the most part, alcohol isn't exactly the most O2 sensor safe. So I don't think you're probably really going to kill much lifespan there by adding a little bit of top end lube.
At this point, O2 sensors are consumables. They're cheaper than your engine.
Yes.
Taps and spares on hand.
Yes.
The cores are obviously, Jack, not the same between those two intercoolers because the water flow is different between the two of them, side to side, front to back. So I don't know if they use the same manufacturer or not, but the cores are not the same between the two coolers.
Barnhill, you might have this one. He says, always good listening, guys. I'm having my Dominator control my fan by pulling the signal to ground, and I want to wire in a manual switch. What is the proper way to wire it, and do I need a diode in line?
So that's normally I would say no. I don't know as much about the noise situation and the protection on the Dominator as much. I'm assuming you're meaning you're triggering a relay with a low side output on the ECU. In which case, sharing the low side to a switch shouldn't hurt. On a low side, I wouldn't see any issue with that. On a high side, I would probably say just better safe than sorry. But yeah, Scott, I think you probably got better input on that.
If you have an extra input on the ECU, take your switch into the ECU and then trigger it through the regular I/O. There's a fan I/O, and then there's regular inputs and outputs. Use the regular inputs and outputs to go in and have it trigger the fan through that section, not the default fan I/O, which is just on-off temperatures. That way you can stack the two and have it turn on by either the switch or by the ECU.
Yeah, that's a way better.
That way you're covered. If you forget to turn it on, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about issues of any kind of noise. You just ground through the switch to the ECU input and call it good.
All right, this guy's going to ask us a question, Mr. Josh. That's going to divide the line. What's the best bang for the buck for a standalone ECU for a 96 Mustang 2-valve turbo? Keep in mind budget.
LS swap.
Thank you. You went there before me.
Someone had to. I mean,
a Terminator Max with a complete 5.3 underneath it out of a truck.
There used to be a meme on the internet.
I got here at exactly the right time.
I would say your best bet is a Terminator system in general. Terminator X is probably the easiest thing to do for that.
Yeah,
I mean, they do a Terminator for those. Again, I think this kind of goes back to the conversation last week of, when do you know you need a standalone? The next step of that is when you know the level of standalone. But, if you're not I stand by my same thing. If you're not having to Band-Aid it and add other boxes to do the functionality that another ECU could, then you're fine. And I think in that case, a Terminator, that's exactly what it's meant for.
All right.
1,000 wheel horsepower turbo LS Holley EFI boost ramp versus timing ramp for power management. Is there situations where one might be better than the other? In general, we try to do it with timing because timing is much faster than boost. No matter what you do with your turbos, timing will always be faster. Is there a time for a boost ramp? Depends on your chassis. There are chassis that the timing upsets it a little too much if you take out too much. And that's the case where a boost ramp might be better, but it's still going to be a combination of both.
I tend to try and use a solid mix of both. And I like to tell people that the boost ramp is like my sledgehammer, and then I use the timing ramp to kind of make my minute changes when I need little bits here and there. The biggest and hardest thing to remember is that your boost ramp is never going to be exactly what you want it to be because turbos don't mechanically do what you tell them to do right now. And that's where timing becomes such an intricate control because you have control over literally, millisecond by millisecond changes. As where with boost, I'm kind of stuck with hey, I hope my turbos get where I'm saying they're going to go or where I want them to be when I need them there.
The other thing to think about is radials tend to want as much power as you can put into it immediately. They like to take the juice right away. And in general, that means the turbo needs to be all the way spooled up as fast as it can get there. If I can put 35 pounds of boost into an engine in less than a second, it's probably going to hook better on the radial than if I try to ease it into 35 pounds just because of the nature of how a radial reacts.
Oh, this is going to be a Scott Evans question all day. Can anyone explain the 3-axis for boost controller setup, aka PIDs?
Which chat is this on? Where am I? What's it saying?
YouTube. Can anyone explain the 3-axis for boost control setup, aka your PIDs for boost control?
Oh, so you're looking at so you basically, depending on the system, P is kind of a large, gigantic jump. Your I is designed to do minute changes to bring it up to where the P doesn't. And the D is kind of a squish factor, more or less, is the way I think of it. It softens the blow of all of it so that it acts kind of like a brake as it gets closer.
Yeah, there's actually
go ahead.
The video with the ping pong ball.
Yes,
is the best one I've seen, because it's a
the guy with the knobs.
Yeah, and it breaks it down into exactly what it is, because you can get it consistent but not on target. You can get it on target but oscillating around. And then the last, so basically what you need to do is walk it in each step: the P, the I, then the D. And we can sit here and talk about it, but there's a video, and I'm trying to find the link for it. And of course,
I'm looking right now too.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember is every system has a slightly different way they do the PID. The general concept is the same in every single one, but how they apply it is ever so slightly different. So the gains on one system do not necessarily apply to the gains on another system. Best example is the Holly. They recommend you start around 30 for the P, 10 for the I, and the D at 0. Other systems will recommend that you start at much smaller numbers on P with no I at all and a little bit of D added to it. So it very much depends on how the PID works with that system, and it's good to ask the people who are selling you that system how that PID works, or other tuners who use that system, how that PID functions.
Haltech will tell you start 0 for everything and then walk it up to control. And that's the way I like to do it, but that doesn't work with every system. The math's a little bit different in how it integrates the PID. It's the same as, when we talk about, a Haltech versus a Holly fuel model, or even the pound per hour versus VE fuel model. All of that changes how you might approach that, but the concept's the same. And I put the link in the Facebook chat. I put it in YouTube, but it doesn't let me send links. But starting with that video, regardless of what system you're using, the P, the I, and the D do the same thing. Just how much it wants of each one is going to vary. But the same thing happens. If you're seeing your error in the spot where that video talks about, that's the spot you need to adjust. Progressive, integral, and derivative for anyone that cares, which they probably don't if you want to get into the math of it. But and it's basically the order of in the equation of the calculus that it would come into play.
Yeah, and if you have an ECU that allows you to do different PID adjustments for different levels of whether it's the amount of boost offset you have, or whether it's based over total boost numbers. Like, for example, the Mtron that I'm using currently allows me to set the axes, and they usually recommend that you use the boost error. So if you're off by 2 PSI or you're off by 10 PSI, you can put different values in for each, because you need bigger steps when you're further off to get it there quicker.
Yeah.
And then you can reduce those steps down. Holly is a single value for each one, right? So the steps are always the same, whether you're 2 PSI off or 100 PSI off.
Yeah,
the benefits
different errors.
Adjustability can help a lot.
Yeah, at a small error, what might be underdamped or overdamped is going to be super underdamped at a big error, or vice versa.
Right. It just means that with single value systems, if you get the right down to the little nitty gritty error really, really good, it's going to be slower to get there, because the steps it takes are going to be the same size as they are whether they're right on the value or whether they're way away from the value.
Hey, Barnhill, you want me to make you mad?
I mean, it seems like that kind of day.
So for those that do tune knock control systems, that's how the question starts. What do you do to validate when it's knocking versus not, to verify what percentage of the reading from the knock sensor is getting into knock?
You make it knock.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. I mean,
you blow up your engine.
I was going to say by when it hits the bottom of the trash can, personally.
Well, yeah. So, there are a lot of good reasons for knock sensors. And a lot of times we're using knock sensors more to listen for other noise and what might be going on in an engine. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to be tuning a knock sensor and you're not 100% factory engine with OEM developed knock sensors, in which case, why are you tuning your knock sensor? The only way to know it's right is, one, to make it knock. so you can verify the actual knock frequency and all of that. Once you've verified all of that, then you go back and you just make sure the engine's not knocking. And you should have a pretty good idea if it's if it's knocking or not. If you're knocking on an LS at 12 degrees of timing or whatever in A, then you've got bigger problems. But you need to develop a noise profile of pull a bunch of timing out, make sure it's safe on air fuel ratios. Once you verified your knock frequency, and then see what the noise threshold is from that, plot that, and then you go from there. That's your base threshold. If you're really concerned about it, knock ears work fine. It is nice to be able to listen to the noise profile for someone that's never heard it before.
What about if we just go back to coolant pressure sensors and look at that instead?
There we go.
Yeah, well, I mean, coolant pressure isn't going to always be knock. I mean, you really want to, you put a pressure transducer in the cylinder, but you'll see some, but I don't think a coolant pressure sensor is good for a lot of stuff, but I don't think that most guys that are trying to set up knock are going to pick up anything short of lifting a head gasket or actual combustion gas in the cylinder with a coolant pressure sensor. Pressure transducer in the cylinder, yeah. But really wants to put pressure transducer.
I think if Scott was here, he'd tell you that in his experience, it shows up sooner on the coolant pressure than it does even on the knock sensor.
It absolutely does. Every time you'll see those spikes in pressure.
A lot of that depends on where your coolant pressure sensor is too and how good you are. Like I agree with that, but teaching people to use that is a lot harder. I think a lot more people are going to miss that because there's going to be so many other things at play where you put it, where you put your coolant pressure sensor. And I think we talked about that in the group chat one day, how much noise you get one area versus the other.
I'll pull the nitrous guy and say, if you were to monitor pan vacuum or in this case, some low crankcase pressure, way before you'll ever see knock, way before you'll ever nip a plug, way before you'll ever lift the head, you will actually see ring flutter and see your vacuum or whatever transducer you have on your crankcase flutter and make before any of those sensors will ever do anything for you.
Yep, you'll start to build crankcase pressure.
And that's, you'll build crankcase pressure, and that's where you'll see it on the dyno or you see it in other graphs. And, Jerry asked, about using knock sensors for other things. It's a noise profile of your engine. So, if I've got a car that I have a log on and it's on the track and I look at the knock sensor and I see, if I'm plotting a trend graph or a scatter plot of it and I see sort of noise, a up and down, like what you might see the RPMs going up and down. I may not see it in RPMs, but I'm seeing the noise profile flutter a little bit. That's letting me know that something's not running so smooth. In some cases, it might be on the threshold of knock, but the sensors aren't picking it up because it's not actually knocking yet, or something else is going on, air fuels, something mechanical. It's the same.
Or it could simply be you're not at the right resonant frequency for the.
Yes,
Exactly. And Chris Smith brings up an interesting point in chat too, pointing out that the pressure in the cylinder reference to crankshaft position, and you can look at a window for a knock sensor, you can look at a window for coolant pressure, and you can look at a window for crankcase pressure. And we like to talk about having tools in the toolbox, so to speak. And the more tools you have at your disposal, the better off you are. So you could take all three of these. Yep. But you could always take all three of these and look at them and come to a conclusion. But also adding in a window, if you're experiencing knock on cylinder number 1 and it's at, bottom dead center, well, it's probably not knock,
Yeah, that's it. I guess that's really a better way to put of, using the knock sensor to monitor things. Using that with other data kind of gets you away. Like, if something says it's knocking and I go and look at my knock sensors and I see something else, it's just another way to correlate other data rather than looking at my wideband saying, oh, it's lean, I need to add fuel. And well, if you got a rich misfire, then that's one piece of data that's not helping you.
All right, there was another question somewhere to the guy. So the guy earlier with the wanting to add a switch to his fan switch, and I saw this when Evans was talking. He wants to be able to run the fan with the car turned off, aka ECU off. In which case, yes, you can trigger the ground side of that relay with the Holly turned off.
Does the Holly let you do a keep alive output?
I don't think so.
No, you have to run power to the switched ignition wire to keep the Holly alive.
Yes.
So you can't do. You're familiar with like Mtron, Haltech does it, where it has an EFI relay. The ECU will keep that open, which will keep the switched power on. But that once that output turns off, either a time's met, a voltage is met, or a temp drops, then.
Right.
Peter says, hey guys, Holly Terminator X Max. Question on idle tuning. I'm having an issue with startup and it stalls when returning back to idle. It is a cable throttle body and a new idle air control motor. I have tuned the fuel and spark tables. Tuned how, first off, and idle air control at 5% high idle, no Chinese parts, throttle body, IAC, etc. There was a batch of Terminators that had the, I want to say it was the A and the C on the idle air control backwards. So verify when you're controlling or commanding TPS open or close that it's actually functioning the correct direction. That would be the first thing.
The first step in any idle tuning on anything is to verify your IAC's working right. I see that across a lot of ECUs and a lot of IACs just being bad.
Yep.
Well,
Take the thing, unbolt it from the throttle body, put it in your hands, hold your hand around it, because if you don't, the little spring will shoot the end out of it, and command a higher value and a lower value. There's a table that is your IAC park position table. The IAC park position is designed for pre-startup to allow it to have a little extra air to get it going. And if you just command values in that around wherever the cursor is when it's live, depending on your temperature, you can feel the thing move in and out. If it doesn't move in and out, then there's a wire that has to be fixed. If it does move in and out, command it back to 0, make sure it pushes all the way in, stick the thing back in the throttle body, and then restart the ECU so it can go through its reset cycle.
So the way you started that, did you learn that the whole shooting the piece across?
I've seen like 9 million people do it. I've done it myself on accident when I just forgot that, oh shit, I should keep my hand on that. I've done so many of them that I've tested. You just learn, put the thing in your hand and keep your thumb on the little pintle so it can't shoot across the room. Because it doesn't have a stop inside. It just keeps going and going and going. It's a stepper. It's just made to keep spinning. Yeah. If it's not all the way in to begin with, it assumes it's at 0. And if you're at 100 steps already, well, that's actually going to push it 100 steps further. So it's going to try to push it the full steps until it hits a stopping point for a reset before it actually starts moving for the test.
Ralph Lee, yes, your Bosch 210s will support 1,000 wheel horsepower on methanol. I don't know about the Walden 2025A. I'd have to research that one, but I know the injectors will get there. You might run a little higher base pressure, but they will go that far.
I saw the same guy asked about the PID thing. He asked if because I had mentioned the Holly, they recommend starting at 30, 10, and 0. When he asked if even at 15 PSI, if he should start at 30. Well, the ideal thing is, like we said, to be able to fine tune it. So you have to just pick a value and start playing with it. And you start with everything at 0, and then you add the P first, and you bring it up until it's not quite to target, but almost there. This is the Holly recommended procedure. Right, bring it up to where it's just coming up shy, but not overshooting your desired point. Then you bring in the I until it fixes and brings it up to that desired point, and the D is necessary if it's too fast at coming up to that.
Yeah. So yeah, if it overshoots and then oscillates around it, the D will basically is the last bit of control.
And you can do that with shop air. You don't have to do it with the car running. You can just plug compressed air into the thing and push and use that as your CO2 source, so to speak. And you can just test up and down real time as you go. There's a live screen that you can use and watch the line. You can watch the commanded amount, and you can watch your actual amount and make sure they follow.
And that procedure is the same for anything that's closed loop control, whether it be your closed loop O2 control or your closed loop lambda control, idle control. I don't know what else are we doing closed loop these days. Position control on anything wastegate, electronic motor related, anything like that, anything that's PID, it's always the same thing. So and that's where having an ECU that's fast enough to report error or sensor position back is important. And that's going to be one of the big things is electronic wastegates become more and more prevalent. I think that's the big barrier to use right now is ECUs that can accurately report the position quick enough and then do the PID correction on top of that, while also doing PID correction for boost target and all of that.
Yeah, I see someone says don't put coolant pressure in the steam ports. Yes, please don't put them in the steam ports. We don't need steam changing everything. I have mine on all the stuff I do. I try and put it as close to the water pump as possible. We've had good luck in the coolant temp sensor hole in the head as well, but around the water pump seems to be about everyone's favorite spot. And as far as best place for crankcase pressure sensor, believe it or not, I got mine on the back of the driver valve cover. Works just fine.
Yep, works perfectly fine there.
Yeah, and in a lot of these cases, it's just looking for.
I'd like to ask a question.
What's up?
Has anyone ever actually checked to see if there's steam coming from the steam ports, or could it just be hot water?
Well, you see, that would. Never mind. Never mind.
Oh, Lord.
I don't even know why I was going to try and answer that.
So mine is actually in the steam port on my big block. I had to drill and tap for where it is. I had to make steam ports on mine, but it's more of it's not really a steam port. It's a air bubble release port so that I can get all the air out of the system. It's a high spot in the engine that I can use to plumb that back up to somewhere else up by the radiator where it can get out. That's all I have mine for, is literally to be the place where air can escape from the backside from the backside of the engine and from the front side of the engine. I have both sides up there.
And I just got a message, Mr. Evans, that wants everyone to know, or wants you to know, that when you were explaining PIDs and it got to the end, you said, and I quote, "The D will fix it," just so you know.
That's right. The D always fixes it.
That was from Justin McMurtry, by the way. What's it called? Guy asking how we can see rise in coolant pressure sensor without lifting the head, and the answer is you will start to lift the head. Just because you lift the head a little bit does not mean it will not fall back down and continue to run and drive normal and not have a blown head gasket. The point being, as a lot of guys have noticed, you will actually see the rise in coolant pressure and begin to lift the head before the knock sensor picks up knock in the motor. Everyone has a varying opinion on that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we just watched a Mark IV Supra bone stock 1J do that at about 26, 27 pounds.
Did you say Mark IV Supra and 1J?
2J, sorry. 2J.
Okay, I was just
dude, so this was a car that was dropped off. We'd already ordered a bunch of parts for it because he paid for it and set it up. He brings the car by. The first time I walk around the car, I walk halfway across the shop, stop, stare at the car for about 30 seconds, walk back, and I'm like, this is right-hand drive. And everyone's like, yeah. It was like, he didn't tell us that. And they're like, yep. So the wiring on that car turned into a little bit of a pain because everything was different just enough, and all the diagrams, of course, were in Japanese. So, but yeah, it did make 711 horsepower on E85 with a Garrett G3550 or G25550 turbo in it.
Little baby.
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude. That was our first time using a G series, and I love those turbos. I'm hooked on them. We're playing with the G42 1200C now on a turbo LS, and it's all I can do to not just immediately pull my 4294R off and put one of those on. But yeah, like I was real impressed. 711 horsepower out of a G25. It was out of turbo at that horsepower, but that was also on, we still have, that was an 8.2 AR. We still have a 1.0 AR and even a bigger AR to go to, which I think we're going to do because the guy's going to bring the car back for cams and head stunts. That's literally, I mean, the valve cover's been off the engine. That's it.
Lee Connor says the crankcase sensor you just mentioned on the valve cover, no issues with having the vents in the valve cover, meaning you're not seeing all the pressure change.
Go ahead, Mark. You're going to get this.
Well, you're gonna see an average crankcase pressure throughout a run, whether it's a quarter mile pass, whether it's a timed solo event, whether it's a dirt track oval race. You can have you're going to know what the pressure trend is, right? And if all of a sudden that pressure starts climbing from where it should be, you're going to know that you've lost training seal. So, it's if you have an engine that's well sealed up and you have even a panty vac on it, you'll pull negative pressure. If you have an engine that has crankcase breathers like a lot of LSs do, you might see a PSI of crankcase pressure, or half a PSI or a quarter of a PSI. If all of a sudden you're seeing like 4 PSI, you got a problem.
I got a couple guys saying Sounds is getting staticky.
I don't know anything about that. I just talk.
Yeah.
Yep, we're not in control right now. The guy who is had to step away for a minute.
But yeah, I mean, getting it's any EMAP crankcase pressure. I guess EMAP versus MAP is a little different. But crankcase pressure, coolant pressure, any of that, it's about knowing what your normal trend is in a healthy, normal setup, and then whatever you're moving away from that. So, if I know I always see, say, 20 PSI of pressure or whatever, and now all of a sudden I'm seeing 40, something's going on, and I need to go use my other data to figure out what that is.
The other thing when you play with crankcase is you start to get to the point you actually rattle the ring. So where you have this nice smooth line, whether it be pressure or back, as Mark was talking about, when you start nearing that point, the line will get very jagged and you need to zoom in on it. Because you're actually rattling the rings on the side of the piston. That's usually what you want to watch for.
Yeah, so I was talking about using knock sensors. You're going to pick up all kinds of noise. So that's to verify, if I see a jagged line on my coolant pressure, but I don't see anything, I only see that jagged line on my coolant pressure only corresponds to some noise on one knock sensor. Then that gives me a window, and I can go narrow it down from there.
Also, Mark Kozak has a good question. Yuli and I can answer this because we've gone this route before, but he has a small stock bottom end LS motor. Is it worth the lighter weight of the aluminum pipe through the day?
I like the aluminum motors.
And you like that because they're ductile and they can move around a little bit?
Well, I mean, if 110 pounds is 110 pounds, And, the reality of it is, especially in the 5.3s, the OD of the sleeves is the same as it was on the 5.7s. So the sleeve thickness on the 5.3s, especially on the Gen 4 stuff, is really, really thick. So the sleeve thickness on the aluminum motors is ridiculously thick. So there's no detriment to sleeve strength with the aluminum versions of the LS versus the iron. So that's perfectly okay. I mean, like all the fastest FBE motors that are out there right now are all aluminums. They're not iron. So, there's no detriment to using, the LC9s and the L33s and
L33 for life.
L33, the OG of the fast LSs.
John, you don't see any problems with stuff moving around in the bottom end, crank or anything?
Well, I mean, the aluminum stuff does move around more than the iron stuff does, but it doesn't move around. When you compare them to other architectures out there, the aluminum stuff doesn't move around as much. And, as long as you make appropriate concessions for that, it's not, you don't have to worry about it.
I'm kind of at the point to my life where the answer to the question is always you need a big block. That's the answer.
Whoa. See, you're tugging on my big block heartstrings, but I have my LS love too. I don't know how to take that.
You need a big block. See, it's the answer.
We have that. We have that covered too. I just,
Oh, well, then you're good. Then everything's fine. Everybody needs at least one big block in their life.
Or 2 or 3 or 5.
Hi, Bill, by the way. Welcome.
Howdy.
I've actually seen a bunch of people ask this, or I've seen the same person ask a million times. But a lot of guys ask about sensors. Crankcase. A lot of guys keep asking. Standard pressure sensor, your KPA sensor. Your I think we usually use like a 0 to 50 psi map sensor. So 2.5 bar, something like, or 3 bar. The AEM ones, any of the, they're all the same SSI sensor. I actually like using the Honeywell MHD sensors. The Honeywell P2X, which is similar to the SSI, actually doesn't deal with vapor very well, so steam or any sort of a fluid vapor. So in cases of coolant pressure and crankcase pressure, it's not always my favorite because it can lead to a shorter sensor life. That said, we've used them for over a year in some applications without a failure. But yeah, just the same pressure sensor you might use as a map sensor or an EMAP sensor, anything like that works just fine.
I've used the standard GM 2-bar map sensor for like 4 years solid on the valve cover with no problems, never a failure.
Same.
So it's worked great. I just switched to a different sensor because I'm using the SSI sensor now because of how I have it mounted on my current setup, but I had no problems with the GM one.
Mr. Bewley, 1/2-inch studs and an aluminum LS block. How do you feel?
I'm going to be real honest. I'm not a 1/2-inch head stud fan.
I know you've had this conversation. That's why I asked it that way.
I've had this conversation like 3 times in the last 2 days with guys with issues of it. Especially if guys are running stock castings, you do not need to put 1/2-inch head studs in your motor if you're using stock head castings. The stock head casting is not rigid enough to take the clamp force of a 1/2-inch head stud. It'll actually bow the stock casting up at the halfway point between the studs and actually reduce the clamp load at that halfway point. And it actually makes the head gasket easier to blow. I'm not a fan of 1/2-inch head studs just because of the fact it takes material out of the bolt stack around the head bolt, and it reduces the area that the bolt has to transfer load into the deck of the head. I'm a much bigger fan of ARP 625 studs in stock sizes. That's what I've got in Dan Wrench's motor. That motor's been 208 mile an hour to the quarter at 3,500 plus pounds. It has stock 11 millimeter head studs in it, stock size head studs in it that are just ARP custom age 625. I like, when you put 1/2-inch head studs in something, you have to drill the heads out. That takes the material out of that column and reduces the material in that column around that stud. I'm not a fan. Not a fan. I honestly don't recommend for anybody to use the quote unquote fancy head studs on stock head castings. ARP 2000s at the most, and just torque to ARP spec.
Yeah, don't 20 over the ARP spec, please.
Yeah, just the even the ARP 2000s are more than enough to get to the maximum clamp load that the casting can handle. And also the way the LS is on the stock castings, there'd be nothing wrong with using just the ARP 8740 head bolts because they're going to have enough clamp load for the stock head. Yeah, the Pro Series stud on the stock castings, Capizzi just uses regular. I'm pretty sure he just uses Pro Series studs. I don't even think he uses ARP 2000s. So, there's no lacking of ability in a Pro Series ARP head stud to put clamp load on the gasket. If you're having issues holding a head gasket, it's not because of the head stud or the casting or the head gasket.
It's the guy with the laptop.
More than likely the person punching the keys on the tune-up.
Downloaded a CAN tune off a website and plugged her in and let her go, and there goes your head gasket.
That Frank's Red Hot tune, baby.
Yeah. But, you know, Matt Cole, the guy that owns that Trailblazer, he posted this. It's been 3 or 4 years back, and I think ERL was the company that originally did the test. But they took pressure paper and put pressure paper down instead of a head gasket. And then they did different studs and different heads and some different things. And they actually showed that on a 1/2-inch head stud with a stock casting, that when you torqued them down, it actually reduced the pressure that was being applied to the deck at the halfway point between the studs. So, yeah, just you can't. It raises the pressure around the stud. It gets so high that the casting actually bows up. The casting's not rigid enough to take a 1/2-inch head stud like that. So you don't need to be using those on stock style castings.
Yeah.
So should we spend a minute on proper bolt prep and installation too?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So most of the torque that you use when you're tightening a fastener goes into friction, whether it's friction from the threads, friction from the bolt to the washer to the head, but there's a lot of friction, and that's what the torque overcomes. And so not only does bolt prep and thread prep and cleanliness become an issue, but the type of lubricant you use, how much lubricant you use, where you use the lubricant, even how you operate the torque wrench all affects how much stretch you get out of that bolt, because the bolt is actually a spring. That's how it delivers clamp load. Think of the bolt as a giant spring. And as you tighten the bolt more or apply, more stretch, the spring gets tighter and tighter. And you can measure stretch, like when we do rod bolts, we actually measure bolt stretch, and there's a spec for that. And that's the best way to measure clamp load. Now, in like a head bolt or a head stud, that's pretty hard to do. But if you've got one guy that's just taking the bolts out of the box, he doesn't clean them, the threads are nicked, he hasn't chased the threads in the block, they're kind of grungy, and he just kind of forces the studs down there, maybe doesn't have a full, maybe the studs aren't seated by, you're supposed to seat the studs finger tight.
You mean there's a tablespoon of coolant under the stud in the blind hole?
Yeah, or there's a burr, so the stud hasn't seated all the way against the shoulder, and then he just puts the nut on with some 30-weight engine oil because that's what they taught him. That you're not going to get the same results as the shop that did the machine work when they prepped all the threads and used either ARP or CMD number 3 or whatever lube they're using. You always want to duplicate what the machine shop used. So a lot of these stock bottom ends, the machine shop is General Motors. And there's where you run into problems because it's all over the board. It's not consistent because that engine is run 100,000 or 200,000 miles and things change. So this is where it becomes an issue of remachining to get everything straight and true again. Once you do that, you need to duplicate the method of tightening the fastener that the machine shop uses. So it's always best to talk to your machine shop. What kind of lube did you use? Where did you use it? How did you run the torque wrench? I mean, all of that makes a difference. Not only that, you only want a small amount of lube on the actual threads of the fastener. You don't need to pile it on 3 meters thick. I mean, it just enough to fill the thread cavity. And then you don't put any lube between the washer and the head in this case, but you do put lube between the washer and the bolt. That is ARP's updated method. It's the way that I've been doing it for years, because if you put lube on the other side of the washer and tighten it, you'll start to notice that as the bolt comes up, it won't pull smoothly because the washer will rotate on the cylinder head in small portions, and you'll feel it in the torque wrench. So these are kind of just basic guidelines. Chris Smith is right. This is a very big subject and it's tough to get right. I'm trying to cover just some high points for you to think about, but always imagine that you're trying to duplicate the method that the machine shop did. It's
Mark,
impossible.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
because I know you're a Snap-on guy and I know you're going to know the answer to this question. How many clicks do you put on your torque wrench before you double check it and make sure it's right?
Only one.
No, I mean, I think he means like duration of life, like how long before you have to get recalibrated.
You're supposed to calibrate it every year. You know, you're supposed to calibrate it every year.
You mean I shouldn't grab the old torque wrench in the back of my dad's toolbox that's been there for 18 years?
Well, you can.
If you need to break nuts on the counter.
So the thing with torquing is you want it to be even. You want it to be the same on every fastener. So, you know, if the torque wrench is off 3% and you're shooting for 100 foot-pounds, you get 97. As long as they're all at 97, I don't think that's as big of an issue as some people make it out to be. But if the torque wrench is off 12%, you got a big problem. Although I don't even think that the entry-level torque wrenches are off that bad. I mean, like, if you are off 2 or 3%, that's a pretty big move, you know.
So another thing on that, and I bring this up because we actually had an issue with this recently. Your 3/8 torque wrench, you know, using it at the very, you know, everybody's like, oh, my torque wrench goes down to 10 foot-pounds, and how accurate they are at the bottom end of the range.
Yes.
You always want to be in the middle of the range of the wrench. You don't want to be at the very, very top of it or at the very, very bottom. You want to be, you know, somewhere in the middle 2/3 of it. If you're at the very, very bottom, it's time to go down a size in torque wrench. If you're at the very, very top, it's time to go up a size or use a torque multiplier.
I want to circle back to the point where you said very, very little of the actual lube is needed on the threads. And I wanted to give an example of how to figure out just how much you really need, because most people do put on too much and they don't understand just how little tiny bit you need. And the easiest thing is our favorite silver material, the anti-seize stuff, right? Because most people touch it and it gets everywhere. So the way to test of how much you really need is put the smallest, tiniest amount of that stuff that you think you can put, like literally the tiniest little dab of that stuff, and run it into a hole and then pull the bolt back out, and then take that bolt and push it against your palm, right? And roll it, and just look at all the threads that are now made a mark on your hand. And I mean, the tiniest little, I don't think I even put any on this amount, will go over every single thread. So it takes very, 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 very minute amounts on the threads for it to lube it properly.
Yeah, now anti-seize is evil, and that's a bad example because, I mean, you'll end up with it. You'll have anti-seize in your hair. You'll have it on your face. It'll be on your balls.
It's a good way. You know? It's a good way to see just how little it takes to actually coat all the threads, right?
Yeah.
Because
I've always been.
It's a good visual.
Yeah, I've always been taught to just fill the thread cavity. It should not stick up above the peak of the thread, or you know, you should fill the root of the thread, but it shouldn't stick up above the peak.
Well, it doesn't even need to be the whole length of the bolt. It just needs to be a dab that's on there, because it's going to fill the whole thing when you spin it in. You don't have to like take the whole thing and cake it like it's a coating of candy on the bolt, you know?
No. Let me take a quick step back. So the guy asked about what you torque heads to. So, and we gave him a quick answer, whatever was recommended by ARP. Look, this question boggles my mind. So let's take ARP. We're going to assume ARP does their job well. John got on the subject of pressure paper earlier. So you take the company that has done all of the hard work. They've put all of the research in. They've done all of the R&D to learn that this stud works in this casting at 92 PS or 92 foot-pounds. And then we get Joe Schmo in his garage. It's like, well, 92 don't sound hard enough. I want to torque that thing to 110. Why? Why not just go off what the instructions tell you to do? They did the work. They did the hard part. Hopefully they've done their job correctly. And go off what the engineers are telling you to do in that aspect.
Don't you know every engineer is an idiot and they don't know anymore?
And
I mean, I agree with
to know that they've done that research. They're doing it because they've found what they feel is the ideal amount to get an even torque load. And that's more important than a whole lot of extra force that, as already pointed out by John from another test, that when you torque it harder than the casting is made for, it bows up in the middle. It's more chance for a leaky head gasket instead of an even clamp load, which even at a lower force then what you think is necessary will do a better job than if you over torque it.
And, Brian, in all fairness, I have to admit that I do spend a good portion of the day cursing at engineers. So there is that.
We've discussed that. I curse at those same engineers. But, there's a lot
people who build cars and design them need to actually have to work on some of them at some point so they can understand the problems we go through.
Brian, did you used to be one of those engineers?
I've been an engineer, and I yelled at all of those engineers too. But at the same time, there's been times I've sat at my desk staring at something because I'm like, the guy that has to work on this is going to be so mad at me. But there's some times where it's like, I'm not going to move an alternator and you redesign an engine casting to make, this one water pump bolt slightly easier to get out. So everything's a compromise, and I think that's something that needs to be learned. There's also a bunch of really dumb people in every profession. C's get degrees, right? So
I think every engineer out there that works for an auto manufacturer has to leave his mark on the auto community, and I solely leave that to fuel line connectors. It's like they have to redesign them every single year for every model.
Don't understand that. That was a problem. 350Zs could not get a mechanical gauge on it because this guy brings in a turbo stock VQ 350Z with a turbo kit on it, runs 7 PSI with the stock returnless fixed pressure fuel system in it. Yeah. So that was also part of my day to day. So.
Jake, as far as anti-seize on spark plugs and wheel studs, I hate it. From a nitrous aspect, when we're plugs in, plugs out every pass, and someone will probably tell me I'm wrong, they get a quick mist of WD-40 before they go back in the head, where the new plugs go in the head every single pass. That's just what I've always done. Anti-seize on spark plugs boggles my mind and makes a mess of freaking everything.
I've seen more issues caused by that. You tell the new kid in the shop to put anti-seize on them, and it misfires. So you pull it out, and you got anti-seize all the way down the strap.
Yeah, it comes back to the absolutely tiniest, small millimeter dot of stuff that you actually need for it, not a full swipe of the brush.
The one I like to see too is when we tell guys a little dab on your adjusters on your coilovers. And I've seen the guys that paint their coilovers with anti-seize.
Yes.
And then they come in I go to work on them and I don't reach up there and
and then it's full of dirt. Then it's full of dirt at the same time.
Oh yeah, so now you're just holding grime.
I take the bottle of the anti-seize with the little cap with the brush on it. I brush that off onto a paper plate, and then I take the end of the brush, not swiping. I take the end of the brush and I dab it to it, and that's it. And that's all I use on something, because that's all it needs to coat 100% of everything. Already wiped off, already cleaned off. The smallest amount you can possibly put on it is all you need of anti-seize.
Anybody got a picture? Anybody got a picture of the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz?
Yeah, exactly.
You will look like that. And I still manage to somehow get it everywhere, even though I wear gloves and full body protective suit when I'm working with the stuff.
Mr. John Ryan, I'm told you asked a question about EGTs a while back. I have scrolled Facebook 87 times. I can't find your question. So if you post it again, I'll happily read it, but I can't find it.
Yes,
hey, Mark, before we walk totally away from this whole bolt discussion, do you want to touch on how to properly chase threads and prepare the bolts and the nuts and the threaded areas in the block or the heads?
ARP makes a thread chasing tap. Use it. Buy it. Put it in your toolbox.
If you use an actual tap, you're not chasing the threads, you're cutting the threads. So you're removing material. You want to use a thread chaser. It doesn't necessarily have to be an ARP. There are Hansen thread chasers. There's other thread chasers, but yes, ARP are high quality and highly recommended. As far as threads on the bolt, is you need to examine them for dings in the threads. If there is a ding, you don't want to take a die and run a die up it, because again, you're removing material. Depending upon how it is, I may take a small file and just take the burr off, or I might use a thread chaser.
I've used
are also available.
Probably not. You probably won't agree with this, but in a pinch, I've used a bolt that I've actually cut a notch out of with a grinder so that I can have a cavity for the gunk to go through, just to take off. Oh, there's one little spot that it's getting stiff at, and you can run the bolt down in and use that to knock off the burr inside of something and then pull it back out. The key is to have a nice chunk missing so that the dirt and stuff has a cavity to go into to be able to come out of the hole itself.
All right, the question. EGTs, taking a car from a single AF, I'm going to guess air fuel, to a full set of EGTs, how much and what are you seeing there variance-wise, big variance in fueling, etc.? Talk me into adding EGTs to my LS turbo car this year.
Timing, not fueling.
Yeah, so here we get into a big discussion about what the EGTs are actually used for. In general, we use them strictly for timing when we can. People over the years have used them for fueling, but that's only because they didn't have the proper tools to do the fueling the right way. And if you go through and you balance an engine with EGTs, you'll find that the air fuel is still everywhere, and that trying to correct the fuel by that, you'll find that the timing needs very drastic different numbers than if you correct the fuel first using individual O2s. And then once you have those stable and consistent, you go back and correct EGTs, everything stays nice and plays nice. So in general, the EGT we strictly try to use it only for timing balances. And I personally have seen 6 or 7 degrees spread between the highest and lowest cylinders on a head, just because not every chamber is perfect. Not every cylinder is the same. Not every piston is perfectly identical. Every little thing, the airflow changes coming down in because of your intake. There's no way to have it exactly perfect on every single one unless you've done $1 million worth of research and development to make it get there.
I dig it. So basically, at the end of the day, EGTs for timing control, O2s for fuel. If you can't have 8 O2s in the holes because they're expensive, and Scott Clark's not here, so I can say this, pull the spark plugs and take a look and see what they say fueling's good.
Yeah. You can still use your EGTs. They're still beneficial. You can get a baseline of what's happening in your cylinders, and you can look for problems when you see changes in temperatures. So you can still see.
They'll show you a problem. You just
can't use them as a fuel tuner.
John, to answer your question, my most recent experience, we traveled north. I had one cylinder in a car that had been consistent 482, 483 over and over and over again. We found one hole that was hot. It actually nipped the plug. I pulled the timing out of that hole, pulled 2 degrees, and added 2% fuel because it nipped the plug. And that car ended up going to 479 pedaling a wheelie. So yes, getting the cylinders evened out with as simple as getting the timing and the fuel right per hole will absolutely equate to car going quicker and being happier every time.
If you're doing windowing on any of your sensors as well, your pressure sensors, you can pick that up and target a cylinder as well and kind of use that to correlate what you're seeing if you're not comfortable reading plugs or whatever. Just more data to back up your thought process, I guess.
Brian, would you unpack the phrase windowing your sensors for the audience?
Yes, we talked about this earlier, but basically using your crank trigger to determine which cylinder is in its combustion stroke at the time. So, if you're getting knock and you only have 2 cylinders or two knock sensors, but 8 cylinders, but you can do knock detection per cylinder, that's how it's doing it. It knows which cylinder is combusting at that time. So therefore, if it gets a knock during this window, so if we know that at this crank position sensor, cylinder 1 is at top dead center of its combustion cycle and we get noise, it's most likely cylinder 1 that's causing that knock or that spike in pressure or whatever. So it lets you correlate sensor data to a specific cylinder.
Real quick, because John Billy just saw the comment too, we're going to back this all the way up because I noticed that Scott Clark chose not to be on a lot today, and he had a reason why. I think the reason's BS. He doesn't want to be on because he knew we were going to find out that he told Larry Norman to pull a spark plug this week.
Oh, no.
Scott Clark told him to pull a plug.
Oh,
I believe Hallmark has a card for that now too.
And Eric Yost,
Somebody make a meme.
Yeah,
Eric
we
said
need
the best
some of
thing I
that.
have ever heard. It's not a V8. It's 8 one-cylinder motors. Make them happy.
Exactly.
I'm going to apologize to everybody. Verizon has put the clamp down on me, so I can't monitor the Facebook questions. So I'm just kind of flying blind and just have to listen to these clowns now. So sorry about that, people.
And I apologize. I can't either. I'm on my cell phone right now due to not being in the right place yet. So
You're relying on Perdido and me.
We're screwed.
Hey, I'm here too. What the hell, Barney?
Last time I checked, Perduto could read still, so it's okay.
Yeah, but that's questionable at best.
I got
Only
Facebook.
things that don't have too many
Barney's
syllables.
got YouTube.
Yeah, I got YouTube open if you guys want to watch Facebook.
Any info on the continuity of anti-seize?
I don't know, but I kind of want to go stick my multimeter in it now.
I'm right there with you right now.
I have a multimeter. Do I have anti-seize? We can answer this right now.
and you have to compare it to the copper, and you have to compare it to the stick kind versus the tub kind.
So I can do it, but who's buying me a new multimeter once I text you?
I got piles of used probes because people do dumb shit with probes and you leave them around the shop and they get.
The problem is it's not going to cover just the probes. It's going to cover everything.
You're going to come out looking like the Tin Man, and you're going to sit down in front of
next time Harbor Freight has their free multimeter bullshit, we can get one of those and it just goes right in the trash with everything.
But it's going to end up covering like half my garage if I touch it with the multimeter.
So do it at Harbor Freight.
All right, Scott, this weekend I'm not going to let you touch the anti-seize because apparently there is an issue.
Bill, someone asked a question earlier, and I think we all kind of want to know why, because you led into something earlier, and Yuli kind of hit on it like, yo, how did this happen? How is it you can defend someone in court in Italy?
Yeah, I might have personal reasons to pursue this, but I feel like the story is worth telling.
Okay, short answer. When I was at Cisco Systems, I was involved in the acquisition of Pirelli Data Systems. And in order to do work on that transaction, I had to get admitted to the Italian courts. And I think it's still good. So that's the short answer is we were working. By the way, just a minor note. One of the worst single acquisitions ever done by Cisco Systems, which otherwise as a company, I was involved in 136 acquisitions and we were really good at it. And that one sucked donkey balls. So there are times when—
Is that a legal term?
Yes, it is. Anyway, there are times when you have to consider cultural fit more than other factors, and we missed it bad on that one, but that's why.
I like it. Someone said, please come to Anheuser-Busch and show them how not to use the entire container of copper anti-seize on 2 bolts and a bearing. And that's exactly what we're talking about. That is exactly what Scott Evans has been saying. Mark Rios brings up, also never a bad idea to go back and check the final torque about 30 minutes after you're done. Hardware does heat up after being run through multiple torque sequences.
Wait a minute. Does that mean we need to have an EGT on the torque wrench?
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
So, I mean, at what point do you just buy a calibration rig and calibrate your torque wrench between each bolt?
My Snap-on truck has one on it, thankfully.
Oh.
So we should probably start thinking about wrapping stuff up. I'm kind of, I stuck down here, but it's my wife's birthday and I've got a date with her in the hot tub. So, as far as Q&A, that's all well and good,
here?
But what's that
Yeah,
now?
why are you here?
Because it hasn't cooled down quite enough yet. So I had a window to come visit with you people.
I'm glad we ranked. I'm glad we're right up there. We're right up there with you.
You had to wait for the water to heat up. It's still cold up there.
It's cargo,
So do we have?
I mean, it's still like 20 degrees in Fargo, but it's 100 degrees here in Vegas. I mean, it's still 101 degrees right now.
Man, I tell you what, I would give anything to be somewhere where it was 20 degrees. Like, no joke.
I'm good at like 65 to 75. Like, that's my happy spot.
Well, it's like 78 right now. I wish it was cooler. No air conditioning is not fun.
Oh, that's right. The compressor issue.
I just had to check. It's 69 degrees in my basement right now. It feels great.
Real quick, one question we missed. How much wide open throttle timing do you guys recommend on a turbo LS with intercooler on E85?
All of it.
Until it won't take any more. Then pull something.
Well, it depends where you're at in the RPM range. If you're near peak torque or near peak horsepower, you're past it.
Depends on a lot of things.
Yeah.
There's not a single magic number that say take it to the dyno, find what it actually likes, and then at that point, then we can decide what to do with it.
There's a magic number. Sorry, Scott here. I got back on. Sorry, I've been taking care of family, but I'll start off with 18 degrees of timing at 20 psi. I'll be 22 to 24 degrees at 0 psi. And a lot of guys like to do that past peak torque, so do that at like 5,000, 5,500 on up. That's just me. That's my starting point when I'm doing something, and then I'll sneak in a couple degrees if it wants it after the fact.
We ended up at 17 degrees at right about 30 pounds in the high RPM range on the stock bottom end stuff.
Yep.
But that was with a big turbine, big exhaust housing, no back pressure whatsoever.
Cold inlet temps.
Yeah, I'll say my setup where there's a decent amount of pressure here. I have to double check what I'm at 18 pounds, but it's probably similar to what you guys are running, closer to 25, 30.
Well, that settled it. So we heard, I think 17 to 30 is the exact number then.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
That's my rule of thumb. Anybody else?
Another satisfied customer.
We swear we know what we're doing.
We guess our way out there a lot.
You guys have fun. I'm going to check out. I'll catch you next week.
Well, I got quiet real quick.
Yeah,
We're all out of steam. We're all beat and tired right now.
We are, man. It's been one of those weeks.
It's been one of those weeks for a lot of people. I was talking to Tom yesterday about that, and I guess a set of injectors that was supposed to be shipped to the shop I work with, he fat fingered the number and put 680 instead of 860, and yeah, Monday is actually so bad. I had an allergic reaction to something. I walked into the shop to get tools, and they look at me and they're like, "So you were supposed to wire this car today? We forgot to tell you, but you need to go home." I was like, "Yeah, I can't see out of one eye." And they're like, "How'd you get here?" I was like, "I'm really not sure." And I went home, supposed to build a harness, and then passed out for 5 hours. So yeah.
And Jerry, to answer your question, yes, 34 degrees slide in ANIC is the correct answer.
Yeah, only 30 if you don't use the anti-seize though. I'm just waiting for someone to come back and say I ran 34 degrees.
Oh, don't. Well, if he has anti-seize on his plug, it won't spark anyways. Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, that's true, yeah.
I'm waiting for someone to post up what they found out when they tested the conductivity of anti-seize of the various types. With
Yeah,
the
you know what?
VOM.
We have to do that. We have all these listeners. We should get them involved. So if someone wants to do this test for us.
Yeah, post it on the Real Tuners podcast fan page, including all your A/B testing results and photographs of the degree of spread of anti-seize that you experience.
Yes. We want to see photographs of what you look like after the testing is over. How much
your doctor bill was because your wife killed you after you tracked that shit inside the house.
And the car cleaning bill.
All right, guys, we're taking you guys out. Everybody have a good one.
I just tell her, honey, it's not what you think. It's stripper glitter. It's not anti-seize.
Guys, have a good night.
Bye.
Everybody have a good night. Stick around. We'll chat.